Welcome to Health Digest. I'm Dr. Mercy Korir. The World Health Organization has declared antimicrobial resistance as one of the top 10 public health threats to humanity. Misuse and overuse of antimicrobials such as antibiotics, antifungals, antivirals, or antiparasitics are some of the main drivers of antimicrobial resistance. Today, as the world marks the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, we have this conversation courtesy of World Animal Protection. Joining me on set to have this conversation is Dr. Alan Azegele. Is a holder of Master of Science in Veterinary Public Health from the University of Nairobi with over 26 years of experience in public service. He is the Deputy Director of Veterinary Services in the Directorate of Veterinary Services within the State Department for Livestock in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives. He is currently deployed to the Division of Diagnostic Services and Efficacy Trial Centers. He is the antimicrobial resistance focal person within the ministry in close liaison with the Ministry of Health. Dr. Victor Yamo is the Farming Campaigns Manager at World Animal Protection. He is a University of Nairobi trained veterinary surgeon and holds a Master of Business Administration degree from the University of Free State in South Africa. He has extensive experience in veterinary services, poultry production systems, and in agribusiness. And we'll start straight with you, Dr. Azegele. Why is it a public health threat, this antimicrobial resistance? And it sounds like a really big name. What is it, and why is it a threat?
Okay, thank you, Mercy, for this opportunity. And I would want to just start by saying antimicrobial resistance, as big as the name may look, occurs when the viruses, bacteria, the fungi, change with time and do not respond to commonly used medicines. And this makes treatments very difficult to achieve, and prolonging illnesses and also deaths in people. That's why it becomes a very important public health threat. Yeah.
Why is it among the top 10? I mean, we are in a COVID pandemic and we have other emerging and re-emerging diseases. Why is it that important that it has been declared among the top?
Yeah, it's because the molecules, the drugs or the medicines we use are not effective anymore against diseases which generally they were able to treat. And with the COVID pandemic, you find it's a viral condition. And when your body is challenged by the virus, your immune system is a bit depressed. With that stress, you find bacteria, which cause infection, may cause illness in you, capitalizing on your weakness. At the end of the day, you find the drugs that would be used to treat that bacterial infection will not be effective because the likelihood of that bacteria being resistant to the molecules, the drugs, or the medicines that will be used. So that's why at this time you find antimicrobial resistance being a very, very significant threat to our general well-being and health.
Okay. So, Dr. Yamo, where do animals come in this conversation? I mean, we're talking about human health, so where are animals coming into this conversation?
Thank you, Dr. I think the most important thing is to recognize the fact that animals are part of our food chain, yeah? And the processes around producing the animal products, milk, beet milk, eggs, even meat itself, is very critical. And in some aspects, we also need to use the same antibiotics or the same medicines to treat animals. And that then propagates either creation of resistant organisms at the animal level, which they are then easily transmitted to the human level. And secondly, the same process, some of that antibiotic can actually end up in the food chain. And that's why it becomes a very important public health situation. And so from an animal perspective, it is critical and important that we look at what's happening at the animal level. And one of the things that as an organization we have discovered or found out is that the biggest use of some of the medicines we are talking about is actually at the farm level. And if you look at antibiotics, the ones for treating bacteria, 75% of bacteria produced annually is actually going to farming systems. Hence the reason why, as an organization, the discussion around animals and antimicrobial resistance becomes very important for us.
So I would think, for example, if I buy the chicken or the pork, I will cook it. Yeah. Wouldn't I have killed that bacteria or anything in there that could affect me?
True, Daktari, but the reality is that we cook things differently. And again, if you look at how we eat, some of us eat things raw. Milk can be drunk raw. If it already has organisms, what we as an organization call superbugs, basically organisms that are resistant to known dawas in this country or globally. If you already have those things in the milk or in the eggs or in the meat, and the meat is not cooked properly because, again, depending on which restaurants or how you cook your meat, there's a variation. So that's one level. The other level is the fact that the organisms themselves can easily be transmitted, either through handling the product. So if there's already some superbugs in the product, it simply means that by handling it, you could easily contaminate the vegetables, which maybe you want to eat them, which are raw. If you're looking at a salad, for instance. So there's various things that we need to be looking at. Also look at it from the environmental perspective. We are in a farming system and the farm is in a location. If there's resistance because the farmer is overusing drugs unnecessarily, it spreads into the environment. In the environment, because of rain or something, it could seep into waterways, which then has an impact on aquaculture that we're looking at. Or alternatively, it could, again, looking at farming practice, we use manure from chicken houses to grow plants. If there's already resistance or resistant organisms in that process, it ends up in the plants that we are growing. So there's a lot of things, reasons why it is becoming critical and important to look at antimicrobial resistance from an animal perspective. Going back to the adage that prevention is better than cure. If you can manage it at the animal level or at the environment level, then maybe you will lessen the problem at human level.
Okay. So coming to Dr. Zegele, which practices are these that people are doing at the farm level that is labeled overuse and misuse of antimicrobials?
Surely there's a lot of that happening. Basically, overuse, you find that because of current, let's put it like the growth in population, there's more demand for proteins. You find with that increase in demand, there's pressure to produce more. And there's this trend where people start using antimicrobials for growth promotion, which is one of the issues that we are really grappling with. Because somebody wants to finish, let's say, the animals very fast and send them to the market for profit. That's one of the practices which brings in a lot of, increases the risk of resistance developing. Then also with that intensification of production, there's also the issue of hygienic practices. Poor hygienic practices at the farm will definitely predispose the animals to infections. And with that, you end up having increased disease prevalence on the farm and use of antimicrobials. That not enough, you find basically there are diseases which can be prevented. You don't prevent, you don't do your vaccinations. With failure to vaccinate, definitely that preventable disease will manifest. With that, it brings up the use of antimicrobials to treat preventable diseases. So these are some of the practices which end up causing overuse and to some extent misuse, where an animal is required to be treated for, let's say, 5 days. The person, after 2 days, the animal looks okay, stops treating.
The same way we take our antibiotics, for example, like after 2 days, you feel better and you're like, no, I think I'm okay.
I don't need it anymore. So you keep that. The next thing, your neighbor has his animal sick. I used this, you can give it. Mine, I used it for 2 days and the animal is okay. So you share drugs and without even seeking professional advice. So these are some of the things which end up making these risks to pick up at farm level and the practices that we undertake.
And is it specific to certain animals? I know chicken, poultry is one of the biggest culprits, as you say, for growth promotion, where young chicks, before long, they're in the market. Is it specific to just this chicken, poultry, or it's all animals, or which animals?
Okay, as you say, poultry is one of the major culprits. There's also a lot of use in dairy production. There's the need to produce more milk as the demand goes, and then beef production. In beef lots, you tend to find a lot of use of antimicrobials for growth promotion. Okay, not very, we don't have a lot of beef lots in Kenya, but where they are used, there's a lot, and then also in pig production. Yeah, pigs also, there's a lot of, so you find even in our plants, we tend to prioritize poultry, pork production, and then dairy as one of the top three value chains that we are looking at when addressing antimicrobial resistance in the country.
Okay, so Dr. Yamo, we have really elaborated the problem. How do we solve this? What are the things that we need to do? Because, I mean, if an animal is sick, they need to be treated. So are there ways in which these problems can be reduced or can be stopped altogether?
Thank you. Very good question, Mercy. I think the important thing is to understand that there's a connection between the welfare of the animal and the misuse of drugs. And in terms of welfare of animals, we look at 5 principal things, but maybe I'll concentrate on the top three. And normally in the welfare aspects, we have something known as fundamental freedoms. Those of us who work for welfare organizations say that animals have certain freedoms that need to be met, especially if they're intensively farmed animals, which means we must provide for their needs of freedoms, so to speak. The first one is freedom from hunger and thirst. If you feed an animal well and give it clean water, the possibility of it then having a problem are relatively reduced. And in terms of feeding, there are things we need to be looking at. You need to look at the status of the animal. Is it a young animal? The way you feed a young animal, a day-old chick or a winner, it's not the same way you feed a producing hen. That is very important. So the feed that goes into that production system needs to be very good quality feeds. I know we've had challenges, and I think that's part of the things we need to address as a country. We have had challenges with maize because most of our diets going into production system are maize-based. If there's aflatoxins in maize, and the natural tendency has been anything that has gone off for human consumption is quickly sent to for animal consumption. If you feed an animal with maize that is contaminated, it simply means that the immune system is depressed, so that animal is prone to disease. If you don't feed the animal well with adequate feed, it simply means that the animal will be struggling. It's not getting the nutrient that it requires for it to be able to produce optimally and protect itself, the vitamins, the minerals, etc., etc. So that's one that is very important. I think for me, the most important under that freedom is the fact that water is very important. And go around and look at the kind of water that farmers put into production system. If you're already putting contaminated water, you're already giving that animal a lot of pressure. And so the rule of the thumb, what we tell farmers is that if you can't drink the water, don't put it in the production system. Because the same reasons why you can't drink it is the same reasons why the animal can't use it. So that's one. The second one is freedom from discomfort, which is about the environment. And I think Alan has talked about it. If the environment is not clean and is not hygienic, it has got poor ventilation. You go into a chicken house, you can smell ammonia. That chicken is going to struggle. Ammonia will burn the trachea system, will burn the trachea, the cilia, the small hairs in the trachea, and that means that animal is prone to respiratory conditions. And if you listen, a lot of our farmers will be talking about cuckoo, the animal is sneezing, snoring, all those respiratory things. If the farmer just did the right thing, washed the animal, the barn or the chicken house clean, ensure that the house is clean, it means that that animal will not be predisposed to disease, and that animal will be able to perform without needing antibiotics. So that's one of the other things that we look at. The third one that I want to concentrate in, and maybe the final one, because the other two might not be very key in this process, is the fact that you also need to have animals free from pain, injury, and disease. An animal that has been injured, yeah, and that then goes into transportation, goes into the unit that we are putting the animal in. If the wood shavings, for instance, are hard, that chick will have bruises, cuts on its feet, picks bacteria, it will fall sick. If the ventilation in the house is poor, it will have an impact on disease. So you need to look at anything that you manage around disease. If you're transporting animals, and sometimes farmers do very well, but then the transportation from the farm to the processing plant is bad. The animal then ends up with a broken wing. For instance, if you see an animal, a chicken's hanging on a motorbike,
yeah,
most likely what is
down.
going to happen.
Or even some cows are put across the motorbike.
And pigs.
Yes.
And I think those are things we as a community need to start interrogating and asking, because that's the food that ends up on our table. If that animal has a broken wing, it becomes a place where contamination comes in. It picks bacteria, which means that either you're going to transmit it onto the plate, or if the animal then needs to be kept longer, then it means that it has to be treated. So essentially, we're saying that we need to look at the whole husbandry and all management at the farm level to ensure that everything is catered for so that the animal is not suffering. As Alan has said, you also need to vaccinate. If you don't vaccinate for the known diseases, the simple ones that you need to vaccinate for, when that disease strikes, there's always secondary bacterial infection, which then means that you'll be adding more you'll be using more dawas than necessary. So essentially, in a nutshell, that's part of what we are looking at.
So basically, just treat the animal the same way you'll treat the person, because everything you said, the animal is prone to malnutrition, to stress the same way that human beings undergo those same symptoms.
Just remember, we are all animals. So we're just a slightly more intelligent animal than the rest of it. So that's part of it. But the other thing that we need to be looking at, and I think the organization is starting to look at, is looking at the whole food system. Because what tends to happen, we look at food systems in a disconnected fashion. Most of us cannot connect what happens to the farm with what comes to onto our plate. And some of the interesting findings that we're looking at this year, early this year, we went around supermarkets, and I think if you looked at literature, you'll find people going to supermarkets and buying meat, chicken, pigs, whatever, or even milk. And you find out that there's a lot of organisms that are going through that process. How do we reduce that contamination? Simply how we manage the animal at the farm level. I've been to farms where the cow is standing on muck. That cow cannot even produce optimally. The teats are literally touching the ground. The milk it will end up with mastitis, or the milk coming out of it will be contaminated. Those are the things that we need to start looking at critically.
Okay, so when we are talking about the One Health approach, we are looking at animal health, human health. Just explain to us how this One Health approach is the way to managing antimicrobial resistance, or a way of mitigating the effects of antimicrobial resistance.
Actually, the One Health approach is a whole society approach, in essence, because you're bringing together different sectors. Like you see, the government cannot, as from just our discussion, no one sector can manage the issue of antimicrobial resistance. So you find there's different sectors come together, different disciplines need to be brought in to work with the others. You find also, what do you call it, the people, rather different, we can say different skills need to be put in place, brought together to discuss, look at this scourge. Generally, you find issues affecting the environment are key. Issues affecting the animals and the humans are also key in all this. So if you don't manage your environment well, you need the skills and the stakeholders in the environmental sector to step in, do their part. And also the general public at that point in time need to maintain the environment clean. Now come to the animals. You have the farmers, the pharmaceutical industries, the feed manufacturers. the government with the regulations. Let people adhere to the guidelines that they are given. Good farming practices, good hygiene, disease prevention, all that comes into play. Even the researchers in that field have to be engaged to ensure that we do the right thing and contain it at that point. Now come to the human, and who is the major culprit, because that human being is the same one who himself medicates. He's the one who takes care of the animal. He's the same one who's supposed to take care of the environment. So that, now when it comes to ourselves, we need to be to ensure that we take care of our own hygiene, our own dwellings, our own personal grooming, and our own environment, as I mentioned earlier. At the end of it, we will have everyone playing his role and in the respective sectors and using the skills and the knowledge that we achieve to tackle the whole issue. So that brings in, so when we take the One Health approach, that's why I said it's a whole societal approach.
And people need to move at the same pace.
Same pace, yeah. And that calls for better understanding. This year, the theme is antimicrobials handled with care. And within the national theme is united united to prevent drug resistance. United means we all come together to prevent drug resistance. So it's a whole, it requires everybody's effort. Yeah. People should change their attitude towards the use of drugs and behavior towards that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in your opinion, Daktari, if we do not manage this as Dr. Azegele is explaining, where do you see us as a society in the next 5 years?
Interesting question. What I'll tend to say is that there's already data coming through because of mismanagement of antimicrobials or medicaments across the three sectors. What essentially has happened is we're already seeing people are losing lives. It is estimated that about 700,000 people die annually because of getting infections that cannot be treated. With the pharmaceutical firms not producing anything new to mitigate this process, our feeling is that one, and again, literature tells me that in around another, by 2050, we'll be losing up to 10 million people. So we need to, as Alan has said, we need to start looking at how do we change our behavior and manage our drugs better, especially in the African context, because here you walk to an agrovet, you find anything under the sun, even reserve drugs, and they end up in chickens, whatever. So that's one. But two, for us as an organization is looking at, when I talked about food systems, I talked about beginning to look at food systems and how it's impacting other things. Data shows that the big pandemics in the last 40 years, big pandemics have actually come from farming systems because of intensification. Look at things like avian influenza, look at swine flu. They're all related to intensive farming systems. And maybe it's time for us to start looking at how do we grow our animals, what do we need to put in place to ensure that the animals are catered for and their needs are catered for, and how then do we manage that. Some of the big things that we're looking at is things like spacing. And I normally say that COVID regulation is a blessing in disguise for us in farming system, because when you talk about spacing or stocking density in the production system, people never used to understand until people realized that you needed certain spacing between people to stop spread of disease. So the world is moving away from intensive farming system to less intensive, what we are calling high welfare production system that cater and gives the animals slightly more space. In Europe, we've even reached stages where now we are legislating how much space an animal needs to have. Those are some of the interesting discussions that we're beginning to look at. And so my thought process is that holistically, as Alan said, we need to come together and start saying, this is the problem, is that we have organisms that are now becoming resistant to non-drugs. Part two of that problem is that the drug manufacturers are not producing any new molecules, which means that if we do not change our attitudes and change our processes, in another 5-10 years, we'll be having organisms that we cannot manage.
All right. In as few words as possible, do you think it's possible to get to a situation where, or a point where we have managed antimicrobial resistance?
We don't have an end date. That's what I can say. But we have a way of prevention and containing. We contain the spread and we prevent emergence so that we can use our drugs for longer, because it's a phenomenon which will always be challenging us as humanity, because the bugs, the bacteria or the antimicrobials will always also want to create defenses against these molecules.
They'll want to outsmart us.
Straight away.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time having this important conversation. And I think what you brought out is that we play a big role because we are the ones on human health, animal health, and the environment. So thank you very much for your time. We had Dr. Alan Azegele, who is the Deputy Director of Veterinary Services in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives, and Dr. Victor Yamo, who is the Farming Campaigns Manager at World Animal Protection. We have been having a conversation about antimicrobial resistance this week when the world celebrates World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, and this show has been brought to you by the World Animal Protection. I'm Dr. Mercy Korir. Please stay tuned for more on our segment on Doctor's Diary and Nutrition and Fitness.
This is KTN News.
All day, we expect our mouth to do all kinds of things. That is why it needs all-round protection. New Oral-B Pro Health toothpaste. Its advanced technology helps prevent both tooth holes and gum problems that can lead to tooth loss. It strengthens your teeth, giving them all-round protection. Because your mouth is doing more than you think. New Oral-B Pro Health. All-round protection for your whole mouth.